The scream pierced the air like a blade, sharp and sudden, slicing through the calm of our quiet suburban morning. I turned my head just in time to see my 8-year-old daughter, Ellie, hurtling backward, her wheelchair tipping violently as her tiny frame crashed into the hedge lining the sidewalk. Her cry was the kind that breaks a parent's heart in half. I dropped everything, my coffee mug hit the driveway and shattered, and I ran. She was lying twisted in the bush, her delicate hands scraped raw, her knees bleeding, and her face contorted in confusion and pain. Her wheelchair was toppled on its side, one wheel still spinning aimlessly like the world had been knocked off balance. And standing above her, expression cold and utterly devoid of remorse, was Karen, our HOA president, arms folded, mouth curled in disgust. "I warned you," she said with ice in her voice. She was blocking the sidewalk. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to process the words. Ellie, my sweet, gentle, disabled daughter, had just been shoved by a grown woman, all because her wheelchair was sitting slightly along the edge of the community walkway. I felt my knees, pulling Ellie into my arms as she sobbed into my chest. Her favorite butterfly bracelet snapped and scattered across the grass like tiny broken pieces of her joy. Karen didn't even flinch. She turned, heels clicking against the concrete, and added, "Maybe next time, teach her to stay out of people's way." I looked up, my eyes catching the blinking red light of our neighbor's security camera across the street. It had captured everything. Every second of cruelty. Every second of my daughter's pain. And in that moment, as Ellie trembled in my arms and Karen vanished around the corner, I swore this wouldn't end quietly. This wasn't just about a sidewalk. This was about dignity, humanity, and a line that should never be crossed. We moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago, chasing the same dream so many families do, a quiet, safe place where our daughter could grow up surrounded by trees, clean sidewalks, friendly neighbors, and a sense of normalcy. After years of bouncing between specialists and hospitals, we just wanted a street where Ellie could ride her wheelchair freely, where she could watch the seasons change from our porch, and where the world might, just for a little while, be gentle with her. Ellie was born with cerebral palsy, her muscles weak, her balance fragile, her speech sometimes delayed, but her spirit? Her spirit was louder and brighter than any voice I'd ever heard. She had this way of seeing beauty in everything. Where others saw cracks in the sidewalk, she saw rivers for her toy boats. Where most kids ran past butterflies, Ellie would stop, hold out her tiny palm, and whisper, "Come here, little one. You're safe with me." And often they actually came. I once watched a monarch land right on her finger. She giggled so hard. She tipped sideways in her wheelchair. She wasn't embarrassed. She was enchanted. That was Ellie, our little magician in sneakers and sparkly hair clips. Her favorite color was yellow, not because it was bright, but because she said, "It looks like hugs feel." She collected shiny things, coins, buttons, bits of ribbon, and called them treasures for my joy jar. Every night before bed, she'd drop something into the jar and whisper, "That was my smile today." When she got her first electric wheelchair, she didn't call it a chair. She called it her dragon. She said it made her brave. Watching her glide down our street, pretending to be a knight on a mission, was one of the most beautiful sights of my life. Of course, there were hard days, days when her legs refused to cooperate, when the pain crept in like a thief in the night, but she never let those moments define her. She'd simply clutch her stuffed bunny tighter and say, "I'll try again tomorrow." And that's what we did. We tried again every day for her. We built a ramp outside the front door with pastel railings she helped paint. We fought with insurance companies, applied for therapy grants, adapted our home inch by inch to fit her world. And through it all, Ellie never once asked, "Why me?" She only asked, "Can we go outside today?" The outdoors were her playground, her escape, her cathedral. The sidewalk, the one where she was later shoved, was her favorite stretch of the neighborhood. She knew every crack, every ant trail, every flower pushing through the fence. She waved at the mailman like he was Santa Claus, and always offered the neighbor's dog her last cookie. She was kind, gentle, hopeful, the sort of child who made people believe in goodness again. But not everyone saw her that way. Some only saw the chair. The obstacle, the so-called inconvenience. And as much as I wanted to shield her from that ugliness, I couldn't, because sometimes the cruelty wasn't loud. It whispered behind drawn curtains. It smiled tightly in HOA meetings, and sometimes it took the form of a woman named Karen, who believed a child like mine didn't belong outside if she couldn't walk like the rest. But before that shove, before that heartbreak, all we wanted was to belong. And Ellie, she just wanted the sidewalk, the butterflies, and a little space in the world where her wheels weren't in anyone's way. At first, it was just a look. You know, the tight-lipped smile that never quite reaches the eyes, the glance that lingers a second too long, not out of curiosity, but judgment. Karen lived 3 houses down at the corner lot with the manicured rose bushes and the unnecessary keep off the grass sign planted like a flag of superiority. She introduced herself the week we moved in, stepping onto our porch uninvited with a clipboard in one hand and a copy of the HOA regulations in the other. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her tone syrupy but sharp. "We pride ourselves on keeping things orderly." She looked at the newly built ramp leading to our front door and raised an eyebrow. "I assume that's up to code?" I smiled politely and assured her it was. She nodded, but I could feel her mentally filing it away, like an infraction. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just particular. Maybe she was trying to be helpful in her own awkward way. But then, the letters started coming. Folded neatly, slipped into our mailbox, or taped to the front door like warnings. The first one was about our grass, apparently a quarter-inch too tall. The next, about our trash bins being brought out 30 minutes early. Then, a complaint that our daughter's wheelchair ramp disrupted the aesthetic continuity of the front yard. Each letter ended the same way. "Please address this matter to avoid further HOA action." I began to notice the way neighbors' conversations would abruptly shift when I walked by with Ellie. Some would smile too widely, others would look away. Karen, meanwhile, always seemed to be watching. Whether she was watering her plants or pretending to check her mail for the 5th time that morning, her eyes were there, tracking, judging, waiting. One afternoon, as Ellie and I rolled down the sidewalk toward the park, Karen stepped out of her car just as we passed. "Your daughter," she began, pausing as if choosing her words carefully. "She's kind of in the way, isn't she?" My chest tightened. "In the way of what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Sidewalks are meant for walking. Wheels tend to hog space," she replied, her voice light, but laced with something darker. Ellie, ever the gentle soul, looked up and said, "I can share. I don't mind." Karen blinked, seemingly caught off guard, then turned and walked away without another word. That night, I cried in the laundry room, overwhelmed by the growing sense that no matter how kind or careful we were, we'd never be enough for this place. A few weeks later, a more serious letter arrived. An official HOA notice claiming our daughter's wheelchair was impeding foot traffic during her outdoor play. I read it 3 times, stunned. Her wheelchair? Impeding traffic? On a residential sidewalk in front of our own home? It was absurd, cruel, even, but it was real. And it didn't stop there. A neighbor's child who used to play chalk with Ellie suddenly stopped coming around. His mother waved awkwardly from across the street and mumbled something about keeping to their side for a while. Karen started leaving her garbage bins just far enough into the sidewalk that Ellie had to wheel around them onto the grass. Once, she even parked her SUV in such a way that it blocked the curb ramp entirely, forcing me to lift Ellie and her chair over the edge while Karen watched from her porch with a glass of lemonade. The moments were small, but they added up, each one chipping away at the fragile peace we had fought so hard to create. And the worst part? Ellie noticed. She asked fewer questions. She waved less. Her nightly joy jar remained empty for days. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked one night, her voice small as she stared out the window. I held her close and whispered, "No, baby, you did everything right. Some people just forget how to see goodness." But deep down, I feared the truth that some people never wanted to see it in the first place. Things got worse faster than I could have imagined. What started as passive-aggressive notes and sideways glances from Karen soon turned into a full-blown campaign of harassment. disguised beneath the thin veil of enforcing HOA policy. One morning, I found a bright yellow notice taped to our door. It was an official violation form, typed in bold with words that felt like bullets: obstruction of public walkway, non-compliant use of assistive equipment. I stood there on the porch, stunned, the words blurring as tears welled up in my eyes. I looked down the street and saw Karen pacing by her mailbox, phone in hand, smirking like she was waiting for applause. The accusation was surreal. Ellie's wheelchair, according to the letter, was creating a safety hazard for other pedestrians on the sidewalk. It was absurd. She wasn't leaving it there unattended. She wasn't parked across the street. She was simply being outside, moving, exploring, breathing the same air as everyone else. But somehow, to Karen, that was unacceptable. I called the HOA office, trembling with disbelief, and the man on the other end said, "Ma'am, the complaint was formally submitted. We're obligated to follow up." He sounded bored, like we were just another box to check off. When I asked who filed the complaint, he hesitated, then admitted multiple residents, though one was particularly detailed. I didn't need to ask who. Karen was no longer just an angry neighbor. She was weaponizing the HOA like a loaded gun aimed at a little girl in a wheelchair. The neighborhood began to shift. Ellie's drawings on the sidewalk were scrubbed off by someone during the night. The flowers we planted around her ramp were trampled one morning. Our mailbox was knocked off its post 2 separate times, and though I reported it, no one came. I installed a camera, but that only made Karen laugh. She waved at it mockingly every time she walked past, like she was daring us to try something. And then came the HOA meeting. I didn't want to go. I was exhausted, emotionally depleted, but I knew I had to speak. I sat in the front row, clutching photos of Ellie with her chalk art and her joy jar, just hoping someone in that sterile, fluorescent-lit room would see her the way I did. When Karen stood to speak, she was poised and smug. "We have a duty to maintain the accessibility and safety of our walkways." She began, looking around for support. "It's not about discrimination, it's about fairness. No one should receive special treatment, even if they have challenges." She didn't say Ellie's name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. I stood to respond, my voice trembling but determined. I held up a photo of Ellie hugging her wheelchair like a friend. "My daughter isn't a hazard," I said. "She's a child. She plays. She waves at your dogs. She says hello to your kids. She isn't asking for special treatment. She's asking for the right to exist here." There was silence. A few eyes softened, but most shifted uncomfortably. Karen crossed her arms, unbothered, and smirked. The board didn't make a decision that night. They said they'd review the situation, but I already knew the outcome. The next day, another notice arrived, this one threatening a fine if we continued to use mobility devices that interfered with shared space. That night, Ellie didn't sleep. She sat by the window in her dragon chair, holding her stuffed bunny, whispering, "Maybe if I just stayed still, they'll stop being mad." That broke me. My daughter, this radiant, resilient, beautiful soul, was trying to shrink herself, to disappear, just to avoid the cruelty of people who saw her wheels as a threat. My husband and I tried to cheer her up. We made pancakes with sprinkles. We let her pick out new butterfly stickers for her chair. But her joy was quieter now, dimmer. She no longer asked to go outside. She no longer waved at neighbors. She stopped adding treasures to her joy jar. One afternoon, I found her sitting in the hallway, gently removing the stickers from her wheelchair, one by one. "Maybe if it doesn't look like mine," she said, "they'll leave us alone." I couldn't stop crying. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn the HOA charter in the middle of Karen's perfect lawn. But instead, I held her. I whispered that she was perfect, that she was allowed to take up space, that she belonged here. But even as I said the words, I knew they were starting to feel like lies in a neighborhood that treated her existence as an inconvenience. And I feared something worse was coming, because cruelty, when left unchecked, never stops at words or paper. It grows teeth, and eventually it bites. It was supposed to be just another simple afternoon, the kind Ellie loved the most, Sunny, breezy, with butterflies fluttering lazily over the hedges and the gentle whirring of her wheelchair as we took our usual path down the sidewalk toward the end of the street. Ellie had insisted on wearing her sparkly blue helmet, even though she didn't need it, just because it made her feel fast, like she was riding a rocket. She clutched her stuffed bunny in one hand and a bag of birdseed in the other, planning to sprinkle it near the rose bush where a family of finches had nested weeks before. I remember the moment too clearly because there was laughter, pure, honest laughter, echoing from her chest as she pointed to a butterfly that had landed on the fence post. She stopped for just a second, her wheels gently rolling to a pause along the narrow stretch of sidewalk that passed directly in front of Karen's property. And then the screen door creaked open. I turned just as Karen stepped onto her porch, lips already curled, arms crossed like a warden surveying prisoners. She stared at Ellie, her eyes narrowing as if the sight of my daughter simply existing was some personal offense. "I've warned you enough times," she barked. "You can't block this walkway. Some of us have places to be." My heart skipped. "She's not blocking anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's watching butterflies. She'll be moving in a second." But Karen didn't care. She never did. She stomped forward, sandals slapping against concrete, each step filled with venom. "This is public property. You can't just park your little contraptions here like it's your own driveway." Ellie turned, confused. "I'm sorry," she said, instantly trying to reverse her chair. But she was nervous, her hands fumbling, the wheels catching slightly on the edge of the sidewalk where it sloped into the grass. She said sorry. I snapped, stepping closer. "Let it go." But Karen didn't let anything go. With a disgusted grunt, she reached out and placed both hands on the back of Ellie's wheelchair. It happened in a flash, one violent shove, a moment suspended in time. I saw the wheels lift, the chair tip. Ellie's body, so small and fragile, was tossed like a rag doll as her chair overturned, and she went crashing into the thick hedge that lined the sidewalk. Her scream, I'll never forget that scream, a mix of terror, pain, and betrayal that split me in half. The sound of branches snapping and metal scraping concrete tore through the air as I dropped everything and ran to her. "Ellie!" I screamed, my voice cracking as I threw myself to the ground beside her. She was crying, her arms scraped and bleeding, one knee twisted under her. Her bunny was caught in the bush, dangling by one ear. Her chair lay on its side, one wheel spinning like a question with no answer. I scooped her into my arms, trembling with fury and fear, rocking her as she sobbed against my chest. "You're okay, baby. I've got you. You're okay," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. I looked up through tears and rage, and there was Karen, brushing her hands off like she'd just cleaned up a mess. "Maybe next time, teach her not to block people," she said coolly. She should have moved. This is a public walkway. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no words came out, only a broken gasp. Karen didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if Ellie was hurt. She just turned and walked away, stepping back onto her porch like she hadn't just physically assaulted a disabled child. That's when I saw it. The neighbor's security camera, red light, blinking steadily, aimed directly at the sidewalk. It had caught everything. Every second. Every cruel motion. Every word. I clutched Ellie tighter, my pulse thundering in my ears, my entire body trembling as I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I promise you she will not get away with this." The sidewalk she claimed we were blocking was now littered with Ellie's hair clips, her bunny, and the last bit of my restraint. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was war. The ambulance lights painted the street in red and white shadows as I cradled Ellie on the curb, her tiny frame trembling in my arms. The EMTs were gentle, their faces tight with concern as they examined her scraped knees and bruised arms. One of them looked at me with disbelief and whispered, "Who did this?" I pointed at Karen's porch, where she stood casually sipping iced tea, not a shred of regret on her face. When the police arrived, I thought, for one naive, desperate moment, that justice would be swift and obvious. I showed them Ellie's injuries, the twisted wheelchair, the neighbor's security camera. I told them everything. But when they walked up to Karen's door, she was already in performance mode. She claimed Ellie had rolled into her, that she had tripped over the wheelchair, and that the child's sudden movements startled her, causing what she described as an unfortunate accident. Her voice was syrupy sweet, every word dipped in false concern. "I would never hurt a child," she said with mock horror, even dabbing her eyes as if summoning tears. I begged the officers to check the security footage. One of them promised they would. But later at the station, they told me the angle was unclear and that they couldn't definitively prove intent. I felt like the air had been punched from my lungs. My daughter had been shoved into a bush, and somehow the burden of proof was still on us. The HOA held an emergency board meeting not to address Karen's behavior, but to discuss the recent disturbance on community property. They called it a misunderstanding between residents. They warned us not to inflame tensions or risk neighborhood harmony. I sat in that meeting, holding Ellie's hand, and realized something horrifying. The people around us didn't care what had happened. Not really. They cared about peace and property values and outward appearances. They didn't want to fight on their doorstep, even if it meant letting a woman who assaulted a disabled child walk away unscathed. Ellie barely spoke after that. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed. She refused to go outside. Her dragon chair sat unused by the front door, gathering dust. Her bunny, rescued from the bush, was shoved into a drawer. She stopped drawing butterflies. She stopped dropping treasures into her joy jar. "It's safer inside," she whispered one night, curling into me. "I don't want to be outside if people don't want me there." My husband and I tried everything. We played her favorite music. We baked her favorite cookies. We bought a set of glow-in-the-dark stars for her ceiling and told her she could create her own universe. But the damage was done. The outside world, the one she used to adore, had betrayed her, and the betrayal bled into our home. I stopped sleeping. My husband grew quiet. We fought over little things, the dishes, the bills, the bruises that still hadn't faded from Ellie's legs. Our sanctuary had become a battlefield, and we were all losing. We took Ellie to therapy. The child psychologist was kind and soft-spoken, but even she looked heartbroken when Ellie said, "I just want to not be a problem." I broke down in the parking lot after that session, sobbing into the steering wheel while Ellie sat silently in the back seat, staring out the window like she was already far, far away. That night, I sat in the dark and stared at the security footage again. Frame by frame, watching my daughter being shoved by a woman who still lived 3 doors down like nothing had happened. And something in me cracked, but not in the way it had before. This wasn't sadness. It was fire. It was steel. It was resolve. I had spent weeks trying to preserve the peace, trying not to stir the waters, trying to be the reasonable parent in a neighborhood that saw my daughter's existence as an inconvenience. But I was done. I printed copies of the footage. I contacted the local news. I called a lawyer who specialized in disability discrimination and personal injury. I posted our story online with the footage, with Ellie's words, with her broken joy jar sitting beside her in the background. Within days, it went viral. People across the country saw what Karen did. They saw the bruises. They heard Ellie say, "I just wanted to look at butterflies." And suddenly, silence was no longer an option for anyone. What Karen had started as an act of cruelty was about to become the thing that unraveled her whole world, because they messed with the wrong child. And this time, we were done being quiet. When the video went viral, it was like a dam breaking. Every ounce of pain, every silent injustice we'd endured in that neighborhood finally surged into the light. Thousands of comments flooded in within hours. Strangers from across the country, mothers of disabled children, veterans in wheelchairs, school teachers, nurses, spoke up with words of rage and support. They saw what Karen did. They saw my daughter cry, saw her bunny fall into the bush, saw the way Karen turned her back, and walked away like she hadn't just committed something inexcusable. For the first time since the shove, I didn't feel powerless. I felt the weight of a community rising behind us. I sent the footage to every local news station I could find. 3 responded immediately. Channel 8 showed up at our door the next morning with cameras, and I let them in, let them see Ellie's drawings, her empty joy jar, the wheelchair still parked by the front door, like a ghost. I let them hear her say, softly, "I just wanted to see the birds again." The reporter choked up on live air. The next day, it aired across every living room in our town. And suddenly, Karen couldn't pretend anymore. Her name was everywhere, on Facebook, on Twitter, on local watchdog forums. A neighbor I had barely spoken to knocked on my door with tears in her eyes and said, "Karen bullied my autistic nephew 2 years ago. He stopped coming to visit me after that." She gave a written statement. Then another neighbor came forward, and another. One by one, stories spilled out like hidden truths waiting for daylight. A woman from the next block started a petition to have Karen removed from the HOA board, and within 48 hours, it had over 20,000 signatures, including several from our very own neighborhood. People were furious. They saw through the polite cruelty, the weaponized regulations, the HOA's silence. They demanded accountability. News vans lined the street. Karen stayed inside for days. Then, as if trying to save face, the HOA issued a public statement. "We deeply regret the harm caused to the Johnson family. The HOA does not condone any behavior that endangers our residents, especially those with disabilities." It was too little, too late, but it was something. Karen was officially removed from her position 2 days later in an emergency vote. I watched from my living room window as she packed boxes into her car, red-faced and scowling. No longer the queen of the neighborhood, just another homeowner stripped of her false power. A reporter asked her for a statement as she walked to her car, and she snapped, "I'm the real victim here." The world didn't believe her, and neither did the lawyer I had hired, who sat across from me with a calm smile and said, "You have a solid case. We filed a civil suit, disability discrimination, physical assault, emotional trauma." The lawyer called it one of the clearest ADA violations he'd seen in years. As the legal process moved forward, Ellie slowly started to heal, not just her bruises, but her spirit. The day the petition hit 50,000 signatures, she asked if she could go outside again. I hesitated, but she insisted. So we took her dragon chair out, and she wheeled slowly down the sidewalk, stopping at the same bush where she had fallen. She looked at the crushed leaves, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a single button, gold and round, shiny like a tiny sun, and dropped it onto the ground. "A treasure," she said, "for the sidewalk." And just like that, I knew we were beginning again. Not in silence, not in fear, but in strength. Karen had tried to make Ellie feel small, but what she did in the end made Ellie's story huge. We weren't invisible anymore. And the sidewalk? It was ours again. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, gently, like sunlight returning after a long, cold storm. The day after the final court hearing, where Karen was ordered to pay damages and attend a mandatory course on disability sensitivity, Ellie asked if she could go outside again. It was a soft question, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure if the world had earned her trust back yet. I nodded, tears already pooling in my eyes, and we opened the front door together. Her wheelchair, the dragon, had been freshly cleaned, and I had added new stickers, bright ones with stars and rainbows, and a tiny silver crown she picked out herself. As she wheeled onto the sidewalk, the one she used to call her road to the butterflies, something shifted. The silence that once hung so heavily over our home was replaced with the faint chirp of birds and the rhythmic hum of her wheels rolling over concrete. She stopped in front of the same hedge where it had all happened and took a deep breath. Then she looked at me and smiled, the first real, full smile I had seen in weeks. "I think I'm ready to draw again," she said. We brought out her chalk bucket, still half full, and she got to work like she'd never left. Swirls of yellow and blue began to dance across the pavement. She drew butterflies, hearts, a huge sun with a face that winked. She wrote her name in bold, bubbly letters and underlined it twice. And then, with slow, careful strokes, she drew a wide path lined with flowers and trees and stars. "This is for everyone," she said, "even people with wheels." That's when I realized she had never been the one in the way. It was the world that needed to catch up with her kindness, her joy, her courage. I watched her from the porch, laughter floating through the air, the sun painting gold in her hair. And I thought, this is what victory looks like. Not headlines, not lawsuits, but a little girl who still believes in chalk and butterflies despite everything. And as I joined her on the sidewalk, watching her fill the world with color again, I whispered what I knew was true. You were never blocking the sidewalk, sweetheart. You were showing us the way forward. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, or made you cry, or made you remember someone who was told they didn't belong, then don't let it end here. There are Ellies all around us. Children with disabilities who are pushed aside, silenced, and made to feel like obstacles in their own neighborhoods. And there are Karens too, people who hide behind rules to justify cruelty. But you have the power to speak up. You have the power to say, no more. Backhand index pointing right, type justice for Ellie in the comments if you believe every child deserves safety, dignity, and joy, no matter how they move through this world. Loudspeakers share this video if you believe sidewalks are for everyone and that no disability should ever be treated like a nuisance. Together, we can make sure Ellie's voice and the voices of so many others like her are never drowned out again. Not by silence, not by fear, and definitely not by HOA bullies. Let this story be a beginning. Let it be a wake-up call. Let it be a promise. We see you, we hear you, and we will fight for you.